Greetings, everybody. Aloha, and welcome to the Center for Chinese Studies webinar series at UH Malua. My name is Winston Wang. I'm the moderator and organizer of this series, and I teach Minqing China in the history department. The Chinese Lunar New Year is coming up next week. On behalf of the CCS, I'd like to wish everybody a very happy and a healthy Year of Tiger, 虎年快乐. Today's presentation is the first event of the new semester. It is also the sixth event of our sub-series, Understanding China. This sub-series aims to foster more balanced and more systematic understanding of China from a variety of disciplinary and thematic perspectives. As China's importance on the global stage increases daily, so does the importance of understanding it, its past, present, and future. We cannot ask for a better presenter to help us with that, and also to kick off our webinar series in the new year than our own Roger Ames. Welcome back, Roger. We are thrilled to have you join us today from Beijing. It's 6 a.m. there. Thank you so much for accommodating our webinar series and schedule. The topic of today's presentation is the Confucian philosophy of family feeling as a resource for a new geopolitical order. As we all know, Confucianism was the official ideology of Imperial China through much of its history. So many of us have some general understanding of its critical importance in China's past. But how about its contemporary and futuristic significance for both China and the world? We also know that family life has a crucial role to play in the personal development of individuals, as well as the general stability of state and society. But how does it matter for the construction of a new geopolitical order? All those are very important questions and fascinating questions to think about, and Professor Roger Ames will help us make sense of them. Before I introduce the speaker, on behalf of the CCS, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. I would also like to take the opportunity to introduce the hardworking team of CCS staff members led by current director, Professor Min Baoyu, Associate Director, Dr. Cindy Lin, and Program Coordinator, Ms. Jianing Sun. During this session, if you have any questions about technical or logistical issues, please use the chat forum that will be monitored and answered by Dr. Lin and Ms. Sun. Please note that this presentation will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. Please also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. By the way, you can check the previous events which were uploaded to the YouTube channel. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our very distinguished speaker today. Roger Ames is currently Humanities Chair Professor at Beijing University, Academic Director of the Beijing University Berggruen Research Center. He retired from UH Malua in 2016 after serving as a faculty member in the philosophy department since 1978. He is former editor of Philosophy East and West and the founding editor of China Review International. Professor Ames have authored several interpretive studies of Chinese philosophy and culture and has published multiple books, translations of Chinese philosophical classics like Analects, 论语, Art of War, 孙子兵法, and classic of family reverence, 孝经. His most recent monograph is Human Becomings, Theorizing Persons for Confucian Role Ethics, which came out in 2020. He has also written articles promoting a conversation between American pragmatism and Confucianism. While at UH, Professor Ames served as director for the Center for Chinese Studies from 1991 to 2000 and played a key role in making the university the hub for non-Western and comparative philosophy and intellectual exchange in the United States. He has received many awards for his scholarship and contribution, including the Confucian Cultural Award at the 2013 World Congress of Confucianism, John Dewey Society Outstanding Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019, and most recently, the Chinese Government Friendship Award in 2021. Professor Ames will speak for about 40 to 50 minutes, then we will open up for question and answer session. At any time during the presentation, we invite the audience to use the Q&A forum instead of the chat function to send comments or questions, which we will monitor and present to our speaker after his presentation. Please do not wait to send your questions until the very end, because then we might run out of time to answer them. We'll try to take the questions in the order they have been submitted, but sometimes we have to synthesize or group them together due to time limitations. After today's presentation, we will send out a brief survey to our audience, and we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a minute or two to give us some feedbacks. So without further ado, let me turn over to Professor Ames.
Good. Wenxiang, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, looks good.
Good, good. Okay. Well, it is a treat for me to return to Hawaii, even if it's only online. The talk that I want to give today is something that I've been working on. And I'm looking forward to having your response. The world in which we're living now, in spite of the pandemic, is still in a seismic mode in terms of the changes that the world is undergoing. And the pandemic is just the first of the crises that the human being is going to be facing. We're living at a time when global warming, the environmental degradation, massive species extinction, food, water shortage, massive immigration, and so on. There's just so many problems that we're facing today. And the Westphalian nation-state system of equal and sovereign states is proving inadequate to respond to a predicament where the world has to work together. Now, the four conditions of this predicament are that most of these problems are inspired by the way in which human beings live in the world. The second is that they're organic, that they're zero sum. You can't solve one of them without solving the others. The third condition is that there's no boundary, that pandemic doesn't care if you're Canadian or Ugandan, it wants your life. And the fourth condition is that we have cultural resources and intelligence necessary to respond to this crisis, this situation. But we have to do it together. Now, what I want to talk about today is China, but recognizing that China is not a country. China is not a Canada, an Argentina. It is, if we include the diaspora, it is maybe 30% of the world's civilization. And it's 200 million more people than Africa. It's twice the population of a combined Eastern and Western Europe. So China is an important factor in the evolution of a geopolitical order. And it has been the rise of China, the rise of East Asia generally, that has precipitated this seismic sea change. The Westphalian model is a scaled up version of liberal individualism, where you have individual autonomy, you have simple equality. And what has happened is it has generated a political culture of international anarchy, everybody for themselves. That's the model that in order to address the predicament effectively, the world has to work together. And so even if we look backward and we have different histories and different cultural origins, when we look into the future, we look into a future where unless there's collaboration among the human participants, we're not going to be able to be successful in resolving this predicament. And we have to get past the fictions of equality, autonomy, and individualism. This isn't the way the world is. We don't live our lives inside our skins. We're not autonomous. Countries are not autonomous. Countries, the economies, we live in political economic ecologies where everything that anybody does influences everybody else. And so what we need is to return to experience itself. And so John Dewey advocates what he calls the postulate of immediate empiricism. And what he wants to say is that if we want to understand the terminologies that we use to organize the human experience, we want to know what subjective means, or objective, or psychic, or justice, or evil, or whatever we want to whatever terminology that we want to use, we have to ask the question, how is it experienced? If we want to talk about justice, we don't begin from some kind of an ideal, a principle written in the sky. We have to ask, how is justice experienced in ordinary human experience? And so Dewey wants to take us to specifically experienced meanings. That's. And so what I want to do as a method is use Dewey's postulate of immediate empiricism. James too, William James, a pragmatist, turns his back resolutely and once and for all upon a lot of inveterate habits dear to professional philosophers, away from abstraction in insufficiency, from verbal solutions, from bad a priori reasons, from fixed principles. The pragmatist turns towards concreteness and adequacy, towards facts, towards action, towards power. And so pragmatism is a method, and it's a method that I want to suggest can help us think through an issue as pressing as a new geopolitical order for the human being. When it comes to the relationship between theory and praxis, pragmatism begins from practice as the wholeness of experience, and theorizing is an intrinsic feature of practical activity itself. We theorize within practice in order to make practice more intelligent, more productive. And so in looking for a response to this human predicament, I want to take a pragmatic approach. And I also want to argue that classical Confucian philosophy is itself a pragmatism. I had a graduate seminar a couple of years ago where the topic for the course was, is classical Confucianism a pragmatism, and a distinctively Confucian, a distinctively Chinese pragmatism. But today, there are centers of pragmatism all over the world: Poland, Brazil, Italy, Germany, and so on. So pragmatism has become a world movement, and one way of de-exoticizing China is to make an argument that it resonates very importantly with classical pragmatism. When we think of experience expressed as Tao, everything that is taking place, and the goal of Jirdao is to not only to know this experience in a cognitive sense, but to participate in world making, to realize within the experience the world that we want to create. And so pragmatism, along with Confucianism, are holistic ways of engaging the world. And they're naturalisms in the sense that they reject the appeal to supernatural conditions. Both of them are perfectionist in the sense that they begin from personal cultivation. Dewey's concept of education produces individuality, the distinctiveness of each human being. And the Confucian notion of Ren is the idea that we achieve our individuality, we achieve our distinctiveness by cultivating the relationships that come to constitute us. Morality, education, beauty, creativity in both of these traditions is deliberate growth in relationships. It's that simple. So Dewey's internationalism is as a place to start in terms of looking for a new geopolitical order. For Dewey, the nation state is a second order abstraction within a world political ecology, a vital political ecology. And so he wants to construe the internationalism in terms of the flow of experience that lies beneath the second order abstraction of nation states, that the economies, the cultures of the world are all interpenetrating, are all flowing into each other. And nation state is an abstraction out of that fact. In China, over the last couple of decades, there's been a debate centered on this notion of tianxia as yi tianxia guan tianxia, looking at the world as a world. That is to take a planetary perspective on the world rather than a nation-state perspective. And at the center of this is a philosopher, Jiao Tingyang, at Shokeyuan, who talks about Wu Wai, that this global conception of the world is an inside without an outside. It's not international relations, it's intranational relations. That is to say that intra is an inside. Inter is putting two things together. Intra assumes an organic relationship among the things that constitute experience. And this notion of tianxia, again, is grounded in an isomorphism between family, state, and world. 家国天下同构, the idea that family is the basic model, and the state, 国家, and 天下 are scaled up versions of family. So the language that Tang Juni gives us to think about ways of talking about this kind of political ecology, Tang Juni gives us this cosmic postulate of 一多不分, the inseparability of one and many, that any particular person is a function of the relationships that come to constitute them, their roles in family and community. Any particular political entity is a function of the relationships that that entity has with the other polities that constitute them. And so the one is many, the many one. That in each thing is everything. If you begin from this idea of the primacy of vital relationality, that we're constituted by our relationships, that the idea of thing is fallacious thinking to the extent that we treat it as something that is discrete and individual. And so the argument that I have made is that that Confucian doesn't appeal to a notion of human beings, where each being is self-sufficient and individual. That Confucian appeals to human becomings. A person is a story. A person is a narrative. A person is an event, not a thing. We don't want to confuse a leg with walking. We don't want to confuse a body with a personal narrative. We don't want to confuse a sovereign state with a political ecology. And the ruler, in serving as a role model for the shared values of the community, is an important element within this kind of Confucian role politics. I want to talk about that because this is a very good example of how we have to go beyond simply theorizing something like political philosophy, political science, that we need to get back to the immediacy of experience. Now, there's a philosopher at Princeton named Michael Walzer, a very distinguished political philosopher, who has a book called Thick and Thin, Moral Argument at Home and Abroad. And Walzer has another book called Spheres of Justice. Justice isn't one thing, that justice is different things in different political and different cultural sites. And so he advocates for a politics of difference, to defer to the idea that people are importantly different, and that there are thick moralities. Some people are Islamic, some people are Christian, some people are Ubuntu, some people are Confucian, that all of these thick moralities must be respected. But what Walzer wants to argue for is a kind of universal moral minimalism, that within these thick moralities, the question is there something that we can appeal to that will bring the world together? Is there something that will give us a basis for human solidarity and for critique, mutual critique? And for Walzer, when he talks about a thin universal morality, a minimalist morality, he's not talking about something that is emotionally shallow or something that is thin in the sense of being unimportant. And his notion of thinness and intensity come together in the idea of a minimalist morality that is close to the bone, something that is so fundamental that it is shared by all human beings. And Walzer himself suggests that there is a concept of justice, a garden variety concept of justice that he can appeal to as a basis for this kind of minimalist morality. Other people would appeal to something like universal human rights and so on. But I want to suggest that when we talk about justice, again, we want to ask what is justice experienced as? And so what I want to suggest is that the idea of justice as an ideal or a principle or a concept is a red herring. It takes us away from this idea of the everyday, when we talk about justice, justice is something that we derive, a sense of fairness that we derive practically and incrementally in the bedrock feelings that Wittgenstein calls forms of life, or that Confucius would call li, the kind of li mao de li, the patterns of the human experience, the sacredness of the forms of life that constitute the human experience, the roles that we live within family and community. And if we just take China as an example, like China, not a country, but a continuous civilization for some 4,000 years, that China has somehow or other, given the scale of diversity that constitutes it, nothing less than Europe or Africa or any other continental site, that somehow or other China has stayed together over these millennia with all of these disparate people, the languages, the ways of life, the modes of governance, the food, the culture, the music, that somehow or other China has stayed together. And not a resource. I changed my title, not a resource for a new geopolitical order, but an inspiration. That what I want to argue is that China can be sort of an inspiration for us to look at what has kept this civilization together. And what I want to suggest is that it is not a concept like justice that has kept it together, but a consensus in the original Latin sense of shared feelings, that it has kept together over the millennia as a cultural and political entity by a shared feelings. And these shared feelings are captured in the prime moral imperative of the Confucian tradition, and that is this notion of xiao, that xiao is the intergenerational transmission of a living, embodied culture, so that each generation within the Confucian tradition has the responsibility to inherit the tradition, to embody the tradition, to understand it, to write commentary on it, to use it to address the pressing issues of the time, and then when one's hair has turned white, to pass it on to the next generation and to recommend that they continue continue the tradition. And so this intergenerational transmission is what is distinctive about the Confucian tradition. Each generation has the capacity and the responsibility to build a connector between the tradition that it has emerged out of and the tradition that will follow from it. And the idea of embodiment, I think, is very important, that physically we see how humanity passes from one generation to the next. We look like our grandparents. We look like our families. But and that's the most superficial aspect of the transmission. That the language, the values, the music, the way of life, the institutions that we have are passed on from generation to generation, and the values within this culture are an alternative to the liberal values of autonomy and simple equality, values that I will argue are a fiction. And that instead of autonomy and simple equality, you have a notion of relational equity and achieved diversity. That within the family, the granddaughter having the milk that she needs in order to strengthen her bones, and grandpa having a glass of wine in the evening so that he can have a good night's sleep, that these are different, but they are part of a kind of relational equity, that the idea of equality as reduplicative quantitative equality is the wrong way to construe what we're aspiring after. We're looking for equity. We're looking for people to get what they need when they need it in order to become the best people that they are. And so we have to appreciate particularity as well as some kind of universality. So this notion of 和而不同 is grounded in the concept of difference, not in the idea of some kind of replicated universality. And so Confucian morality is holistic, pragmatism holistic, in the sense that whatever justice is going to be, whatever the consensus is going to be, it's going to have to include partiality as well as impartiality. That what Michael Walzer is looking for as a minimalist morality has to respect partiality as well as impartiality. That means that the Confucian way of living the family is Confucian. And in order for this to serve as a minimalist morality, it doesn't mean that Italians have to become Confucian. It means that Italians also have a profound commitment to family feeling, that Africans also have a profound commitment to family feeling. And so it's 一多不分 that this kind of minimalist morality grounded in a notion of family feeling is both partial and impartial. And the textual background. Someone asked Confucius, why are you not employed in government? The master replied, the Book of Documents says, it all lies simply in family reverence. 孝, being filial to your parents and finding fraternity with your brothers, is in fact carrying out the work of governing. In doing these things, I am participating in governing. Why must I be employed in government? That in the Analects of Confucius, the idea of government itself is grounded in the notion of family, the isomorphism between family, country, and tianjia, and world. Again, in the Analects, exemplary persons concentrate their efforts on the root, for the root having set the proper path in life, Tao, will grow therefrom. As for family reverence and fraternal deference, these are, I suspect, the root of becoming consummate in one's conduct. So the very notion, this central idea of Confucianism, the notion of ren, is itself grounded in the notion of xiao. The master said, if you lead the common people with policy and effect social order with punishments, they will avoid wrongdoing, but will not develop the appropriate sense of shame. If you lead the common people by modeling virtuosity in your conduct and effect social order by encouraging propriety in rules and relations, the people will not only develop a sense of shame, but also order themselves. And so governing is not imposing order on the people. It's not top imposing order on what is below. It's really a strategy for effecting social political order. And that is modeling and moral education, an education that promotes the idea of people buying into a certain way of living, certain forms of life, a shared morality among the people. And then in the Mengzi, the statement, there's a popular maxim heard among the people who all say, the world, the state, the family. The world is rooted in the state in the family, and the family in one's own person, the cultivation of one's own person. And so what you have is you have a parental ruler celebrated as a role model for the shared values of the community, and people thus being inspired by such governance to invest themselves heavily in achieving propriety in their own family roles, where the notion of achieved diversity is this notion of gongxiang, is this notion of optimizing symbiosis in what we might call the moral economy of Confucian virtuosic politics that are rooted firmly in family feeling. Now, I've used the word ecology repeatedly, and this word ecology was coined by a German zoologist named Ernst Haeckel to describe economies of living forms. And so the etymology of ecology goes back to the Greek oikos, meaning household or habitat. And so what ecology is to understand and interpret the world in terms of vital interdependent relations that obtain among organisms within their environments. And it contrasts, in one of the things that I've been working on over these last few years is a contrast between ontology as the science of being per se that gives us a world full of things, of independent and discrete things, and a notion of zootology that I take out of the Book of Changes, where zoe is the Greek word for life, like zoology. So zootology is this notion of shang lun. In the Book of Changes, we see passages like shang zhi wei yi, that the meaning of change itself is defined denotatively as procreative living, shang bu yi, that shang is an unbounded conception of life. Tian di zhi da de yue xiang, that the greatest capacity of the cosmos itself is its vitality, is its life. And so the Book of Changes gives us a kind of contrast between Greek ontology, Aristotle, Plato, the logic of knowing based in the concept of eidos and telos, the formal and the final causes, and this Confucian cosmology grounded in the notion of living, the art of living. And so this idea of ecology itself goes back to the notion of family, the familial roots of ecological language. And what this kind of zootology gives us is it gives us a holographic focus field language, that if we are organically related, then the whole is always in each part, that everything is in anything. This is the kind of focus field language of Confucianism, the holographic language of Confucianism, that if each of us is an event, a narrative that interpenetrates with all of the other narratives that constitute experience, then the entirety is within each moment of each person's life. So this kind of focus field language is fundamental. And the etymology of focus, again, is hearth or fireplace, taking us back to the home, the family. And then again, field is another term that like focus has a domestic agrarian reference, that the foods that are brought to the hearth, the fireplace, as the center of the family come from the field, where you have farming and grazing that supplies family with its provisions. And so this idea of hearth and home, as a way of thinking about the definition, the emergence of personal national identity as organisms within a field, within an environment, is helpful. And so the dynamics of family reverence as the prime moral imperative in the process of intergenerational transmission of the living cultural tradition is captured in two cognate characters that speak to the physical, cultural, and narrative continuities within the enduring family lineage. That is Li as embodied living, and Ti as lived embodying. that these two cognate characters really give us a conception of the mechanics of achieving personal identity. The notion of Li denotes a continuing, complex, and always novel pattern of invested institutions and significant behaviors that is embodied, augmented, and reauthorized by succeeding generations as the persistent cultural authority that serves to unify the family lineages and clans as a specific yet extended body of peoples. The famous translator of Western liberalism into the Western Academy is a man living at the end of the Qing dynasty named Yan Fu. And Yan Fu looks back on 2 millennia of imperial China, and he says, if you want to talk about social and political order in China, 30% is emperor, 70% is jiazu, is the family lineage, shizu is the is family. That family is the center of social and political order. And I would argue that that's true today, that one of the problems that we have with this anti-China hysteria in the Western media is that China's concept of the political is different from the liberal democracy, and that we fail to see that. Something like the control of the pandemic that has been successful within the Confucian cultures, not just China, but in Japan, in Korea, in Vietnam, that the Confucian cultures have been able to control the pandemic, not because of some draconian government imposition where people are being forced to do something, but by virtue of a kind of shared sense of community, a concept of family, these isomorphism between polity and family. That we can talk about this when we have our conversation. There's also this other form of the character for body that is root. In the simplified characters, Japanese variations on it, that this idea of embodiment, the lived body, is the root of the human experience. But it has to be understood in terms of root and canopy being mutually entailing. It's not that the root grows the tree and the root grow together. And so personal cultivation and cosmic meaning are mutually entailing. They happen together, or they don't happen at all. And so this notion of rootedness has to be understood in terms of the roots grow the tree, but then the branches are roots that reach to the sky, that grow, the leaves grow the roots. And so you have this kind of symbiosis that is part of vital ecology, ecological thinking. Now, what recommends the concept of family as a minimalist morality? Let's just reflect on the family for a minute. Family is the oldest and most pervasive human institution, and for most people, with all of their differences, their highest value. That if there is a shared value in the human experience, perhaps it's family. Basing a minimalist ethic on family feeling is thus inclusive and appealing to those initial conditions most broadly defining of the human experience. It is doubtful that any national or transnational government will ever be able to provide adequate social welfare services that would diminish our reliance upon the institution of family for a population in a resource shrinking and ecologically fragile world, fast approaching 8 billion people. So that family it has historically and continues today to be the ground of social welfare. Even though families within thick moralities subscribe to significantly different values and are certainly lived in importantly different ways, there is sufficient congruence at the thin and yet intense level of family feeling to claim this locus as having the best chance of providing a common core morality for all humankind. Family feeling provides us the broadest possible basis for developing appropriate ethical impulses where such feelings are themselves more primitive than thinking or reasoning or theorizing. That family are our most fundamental feelings that are then extended out to community, to society more broadly. And they provide us, a grandmother in her love of her grandson is the most ordinary thing and the most extraordinary thing, because each of them are growing themselves morally in their relationship. The grandson is learning to love by being loved, and the grandmother is deferring to the particularity of the grandson in the healthy relationship and trying to help him grow in a way that is consistent with his own interests, his own trajectory as a human being. Lived roles in families and their attendant values are more effective than abstract rules and principles to the extent that they provide a concrete impetus for determining what to do next. Because he is my brother is a powerful argument that does not need to be further theorized. There's a famous example given by Bernard Williams in his discussion of ethics, where he conjures up a situation in which two people are drowning and a man has to save one of them but cannot save them both. And so the man saves his wife as opposed to the second person. Williams argues that the man doesn't have to theorize that choice, that to try to theorize that is one thought too many, that I saved her because she is my wife is a powerful argument. So the power of family feeling. Family feeling satisfies the pragmatic requirement of beginning from specifically experienced meaning rather than from second order concepts or theories, and thus aligns with Walzer's observation that thin morality and intensity come together as morality close to the bone. And that idea of close to the bone as a metaphor brings us back to the notion of tea, of family with the gudzapang. Family, in underscoring the inseparability of privilege and responsibility, of entitlements and obligations, is a model of human organization that can most effectively challenge the prevailing ideology of self-interested individualism. Individualism in its time was a useful idea in liberating people from an aristocratic kind of worldview, liberating minorities, liberating us in terms of gender. But individualism is, as it is construed, for me, has become a pernicious fiction that is responsible for so much of the fragmentation of the human experience, that we have to understand ourselves as we really are, the postulate of immediate empiricism, and that is that we all live within shared ecologies, that we live physically, we live intellectually, we live culturally, we live politically within these interdependent vital ecologies. The immediate implication of a relational understanding of oneself rooted in family is that if other members of your family flourish, you flourish too. And by extension, if your neighbor does better, you do better. That this way of thinking, 己有利而利人, this way of thinking takes us away from the zero-sum thinking, that somehow or other our interests are lessened if somebody else gains. That in fact, if a neighborhood flourishes, people flourish together. If a polity flourishes, people flourish together without a boundary set upon it. So while this alternative conception of agency is derived from family feeling, it has immediate application to corporate and political entities at a higher level of abstraction. That relational equity, achieved diversity, can be scaled up to a corporate and a political level. And for the great majority of the rest of the world's people in Africa, Asia, the Americas, and the Middle East, their self-understanding is that they are embedded in a social ecology of daughters and sons, mothers and fathers, spouses, siblings, cousins, neighbors, members of clans, all with close ties to specific geographic areas and communities, religious and secular, a much more relational Confucian language than Enlightenment and modern liberal terms like autonomy and equality, individualism. I want to end with a book that I used in my course last semester. There's a historian at Harvard named James Hankins, who I met in Hangzhou a couple of years ago. And I think his book, Virtue Politics, was published in 2019. And what Hankins argues, Hankins doesn't have anything to do with China in an immediate sense. This book is all about Renaissance Italy. And what he does is he looks at the structure of Renaissance Italy. And his argument is that all of these different city-states, very much like the ancient Chinese model in the early Zhou dynasty, Florence and Venice and all of these different competing city-states, that flourishing or failing as a political entity in Renaissance Italy was not a function of formal constitutions, of formal political institutions. It was a function of political morality. It was a function of moral leadership within these communities. And so Hankins' argument is that virtuous leadership has a necessary role in a flourishing politic. And the reason that I met Hankins in Hangzhou was that the last chapter of this book is called The Light from the East. And what Hankins does is he rehearses the classical Confucian idea of moral leadership, moral rulers. It was moral rulers rather than specific institutional or constitutional models that was able to galvanize good governance and human flourishing in Renaissance Italy. And so Hankins says he invented this title out of classical Confucian philosophy. And this is not something that has been missed by people who have come to China and engaged China. If we go back to Matteo Ricci, in 1584, he reports back to Rome, and this is his own language. The Chinese, through their statecraft, into which they have put all their effort and achieve such brilliance that they leave all other nations behind. This is Ricci. Leibniz, in his Novissimus Seneca, Frank Perkins will know this, News from China, he observes, there is on earth a people who, though we in our view, so very advanced in every branch of behavior, still surpass us in comprehending the precepts of ethics and politics adapted to the present life and use of mortals, is China. So Leibniz, in his Novissima Seneca, really sees China as being a kind of model that can be appealed to in terms of this what Leibniz is really identifying. If we read this text carefully, he's really talking about this isomorphism between family, polity, and world. So I'm going to stop there, and I look forward to a conversation with my old friends at the University of Hawaii.
Many thanks to Professor Ames for your very enlightening and very informative talk on a very important topic. Let's move into the Q&A session now, but before we do that, I'd like to take the prerogative as the moderator to, ask my own questions and also make some comments. Professor Ames, you just mentioned a series of extraordinary individuals, Matteo Ricci, Leibniz. I also want to add one to the list, who is the British historian and philosopher Arnold Toynbee. He's an extraordinary historian. Back in the 1960s and 70s, he also saw the danger of disintegrating human society, just like what some of us are feeling now. And he called for an effective leadership to take on the mission of unifying the world. And as a historian, he studied 26 major civilizations in world history and their rise and fall in the course of world history. And he anticipated that the Chinese nation would be able to shoulder such a leadership role. He said the Chinese culture has a unique spirit of humanism, thanks much to its Confucianism, which has given China the capability to make peace and harmony. I see a lot of connections and similarities between Toynbee's argument and your explanation here. What do you think of his argument? Can China really meet the leadership call? That's my question.
I think so, Wenjiang. I think that China can certainly be part of it. Like what I'm arguing is not that Confucianism is the answer to all of the world's problems. What I am arguing is that this cultural tradition, this hard-won 4,000-year-old cultural tradition, has resources that can stimulate us, that can inspire us to rethink what I take to be one of the major problems in the world today, and that is this notion of individualism. When I look at the American response to the pandemic that we're experiencing right now, individualism is the fundamental problem. It's people who see themselves as having a right that is separate from an obligation. And that way of thinking, I think, is pernicious. It's pernicious. It's anarchism. It's pernicious at a personal level, but it's also pernicious at a political level. And so I think that if we're going to solve the world's problems today, we need to include all of the world's cultures. And Confucianism, coming from the Far East, coming from China, coming from Korea, coming from Japan, coming from Vietnam, I think is an important asset that we need to embrace.
Great. Thank you so much. We have a lot of questions submitted, so let's get into it. The first question is actually related to what Professor Ames just mentioned. Every major cultural, different culture have their place to have their contribution to this shared morality or a new geopolitical order. And our first question is from D. Blakely. His question is there a place of Taoist ideas in your project? And I think you can extend this question even further. What other resources can other world cultures like Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism bring to the urgent task of shaping a new global geopolitical order.
Good, good, good. It's good to hear from Don, who's been teaching in our philosophy department for many years now. Of course, my way of thinking about Confucianism is San Jiao Wei Yi, three traditions as one. That in China, people don't usually identify themselves exclusively as Confucian or Taoist or Buddhist, that the human experience is complex enough that we need all three of these traditions to organize the human experience. Today, I'm giving a lecture. I'm very much in my Confucian mode. Later on this evening, I'm going to have a glass of wine and watch a British detective story, and I'm going to be a Taoist, enjoying myself. Tomorrow morning, when the dog dies, I'm going to send the dog on his way, and that I will be in a Buddhist mode. So within China itself, these three traditions are interpenetrating and overlapping. And that's the same as Wen Xiang has said, this is true of Buddhism and Islam and all of the other kind of moralities, thick moralities we have as human beings, that none of them are exclusive. But what we need is yi duo bufan. We need to celebrate the duo, the kind of pluralism, is what makes the human experience so extraordinary, is its pluralism. But at the same time, we need something that will bring us together, that will provide a human solidarity, that will relieve the sense of fragmentation that we experience in the world today. So I think that this notion of xiao, from a Confucian perspective, is an inspiration for other cultures to look back at their own concept of family, their own sense of family feeling, and join Confucianism in constituting the yi.
Great. Speaking of xiao, we have a question from Robin Fujikawa. The question is family feeling the same as family reverence xiao?
Yes. Well, good, Robin. Boy, it's really quite wonderful, Wen Xiang, you gave me this opportunity. I'm having a chance to talk to old friends. It's certainly like the way I would, in Chinese, I would call it qin qing, or the idea of family feeling. But I think it's another way. It's aspectual. It's another way of talking about family reverence. Xiao is family. I translate as family reverence. People have translated as filial piety, but that brings in a sort of a Christian value that I don't think is there in the Confucian tradition. So family reverence is better than filial piety, I think. At the same time, it's grounded in a sense of family feeling. So these are aspects of the same thing, Robin.
Okay. Our third question is from anonymous attendee. The question is, did they share the same bottom line of ethics in the state, family, and the world? Did Confucius talk about it? How was the relationship between his family, state, world, and the world different from ours?
Yeah, well, one of the experiences I've had when I was traveling in the old days when we could travel internationally, I would go to the American mainland or to some other cultural site, and I would make this argument. I would talk about this notion of xiao, and I could see in the faces of the people that I was talking to this a kind of resentment. Like what their faces were telling me was, we care about family too. That family is really fundamental, and that's the appeal. That individualism for me is a fallacious way of thinking. We're not individuals, quite simply. And so we have to get away from that way of thinking, and we have to get back to the concept of family as that institution is lived in our different cultural sites. Now, in Confucius's time, you had a notion of 大家, where 3 generations of family would live together So his family experience is going to be different from the experience that we have today. But there is this kind of intensity in family feeling that carries over. Even though China today is nuclear family as opposed to jiazu, when I go out, right now we're approaching the Chinese New Year, everything in China has to do with family. My department in the university is very familial in terms of its relationships. What I'm doing in China today that is for me is very interesting is that I'm learning to be an old person in a Chinese world. When I walk into a meeting, people stand up. When I leave the meeting, people hold my arm and help me down the stairs and take me to my bicycle and send me off to my home. That the idea of family is a very powerful feeling within Chinese culture. And I think it's there in most cultures. I think that it has been diluted by the concept of individualism. So I cited text from Confucius where he is making the argument that governance is grounded in family. And that has persisted down to the present time.
Great, thank you. We have many questions here. We have to go fast. The next one is from Andrew Kelly. If Confucian morality is supposed to be particular, I save wife over a stranger, how is proximity determined in the international realm? Wouldn't this ethical logic need the United States, say, to side more with the British because of our shared English heritage? It does not seem as though this ethic maps perfectly onto international ecology, or at least in a way that is counterintuitive to solving collective action problems.
Thank you, Andrew. I think your question is one that really gives us a chance to make a point about America today. Like America's polarization really has to do with people who see themselves as being European and people who see themselves being European and therefore American, and an America that is pluralistic, that has all different kinds of people. African Americans are people who came to America long before my family from England. America, the Asian population in America today, the Hispanic population in America today, that the changing political body of America is a challenge to old proximate thinking that we need to see. Like for America to flourish, America has to recognize itself as part of an international ecology and comport itself in that way. I don't think it's being very successful today. Enough said.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Jin Zhong. How can the family feeling be of use to the modern world where traditional family models are dissolving? For example, same-sex marriages, the increasing number of single, unmarried men and women, etc.
I once, I gave a lecture at Yuelu Shuyuan in Henan. And after my lecture on Confucian values, a young woman stood up in the audience and she said to me, you know, I'm 30 years old. I'm an artist. I don't want to get married. I don't want to have children. I want to live the life that I'm living. She said, does your Confucianism have room for me? And I said, if it doesn't have room for you, it's not my Confucianism. That we need a progressive, evolutionary Confucianism, a Confucianism that will address gender issues, that will address economic disparity, that will address issues like same-sex marriage and all of the other complexities of the human experience. And so my sense of family is that people, different kinds of people, have to be included within this sense of family feeling, that this woman who was an artist, who didn't want to get married, she lives her family feeling within her pattern of relationships in a way that is different from the normal pattern, perhaps. But the concept, the primary value, a primary value of Confucianism is inclusiveness. You know, that families all have strange uncles, all have interesting characters, the black sheep, you know, and so on. But family is lived with those tensions, and those tensions contribute to the intensity of family feeling.
Thank you. Our next question is from Huang So Beck. Sorry for the pronunciation. The question is, while this approach to thinking about relationship is awesome, I was uncertain how this approach can be actualized in the contemporary context. How can this approach be instituted in the today's context, and where can we start? Actually, I have a similar question related to this. So what are the practical ways to formulate this very wonderful minimalistic morality that provide limited solidarity for us to unite the world? Look at the United States. People are still talking about whether we should wear masks during the height of the global pandemic. You know, so everybody talk about the private freedom without thinking about the public duty of safeguarding public safety and health. So how to implement this, you know, minimalist morality based on family feeling in the actual world?
And that's why two things, Wenxiang. Number one, that's why I began from Dewey's postulate of immediate empiricism. What I wanted to say is I don't want to theorize and build, you know, these castles in the sky. I want to start from human experience and ask the question, how can we practically accomplish what I'm talking about? So that was my inspiration. The second thing is I introduced that virtue politics of James Hankins specifically for that reason. What we have experienced in the world today, think of Obama, I think of Trump, that the effects of Trump in the world have been catastrophic. Biden can't climb out of the hole that Trump didn't just affect America. I talked to, I have a student in Poland that I'm supervising right now, and she was talking about how in Poland on Polish National Day that a bunch of these kind of neo-Nazis burned down a building because it had a flag, a rainbow flag that reflects sort of gay relationships flying in front of it. That what Trump did was he unleashed a kind of incivility in the world that is really troubling. And so the answer, Wenxiang, to how do we make it practical is that we need to find virtuous leadership. We need to educate leadership in such a way that it will lead the world, it will present a model for the world, a role model for, so we need a role politics. We need to be vigilant in finding the best kind of leadership, a kind of moral leadership that reflects our most fundamental values.
Well said. Couldn't agree more. We have another question from Frank Perkins. actually is related to what we have talked about earlier. Historically, Confucians thought Tianxia should be unified through a single leader, and that, as you said, the leader should be a role model for shared values of the community. But given diverse communities, it seems there either cannot be a common leader, still leaving a bunch of distinct leaders, or else that an international leader could only exemplify a thin morality. How do you see this working out on that international level?
Yeah, I think that one of the, Zhao Tingyang, in his, thanks for the question, Frank, Zhao Tingyang, in his promotion of this concept of Tianxia, has really been misunderstood. He uses a Chinese term for global or planetary order. And because he uses a Chinese term, people accuse him of promoting Chinese hegemony, that he wants China to rule the world, that this is his goal. That's not what he's talking about at all. But what my problem with Zhao Tingyang is that he uses game theory to construct a rational theory that is not so different from Rawls. John Rawls gave us a theory of justice, a perfect theory of justice based upon principles. And it's simply an abstract theory. It doesn't have practical application, and it doesn't appeal. Both of them appeal to the concept of self-interest. Rawls and Zhao Tingyang's concept of Tianxia, and the idea is a kind of contractarian that I'm going to buy into Tianxia because it's in my best interest. That way of thinking about a global order for me is deficient. That one has to understand that one's own self-interest and the interest of one's family, the interest of one's neighbor, are mutually entailing. That the model of Tianxia, or of global planetary order, that I would advocate is 一多部分. That each polity is different by virtue of its relationship with every other polity. It's a kind of unsummed totality. The concept of Dao in Chinese and Wanwu are two ways of looking at the same thing. Dao isn't the source of Wanwu, like the Christian God is the source of the world. Dao and Wanwu, Dao is all about continuity. Wanwu is all about particularity. And these two things come together. And these two things are mutually shaping. So the relational equity and the achieved diversity really have to do with the notion of 一多部分. It's really good that we have Muslims in the world. It's really good that we have Ubuntu people in the world. It's really good that we have Buddhists in the world. That this way of thinking about world order is a politics of difference, while at the same time promoting something that we own together.
I like to intervene here by mentioning a very famous quote or saying from the sociology, Fei Xiaotong, which greatly explains your point about the peaceful coexistence and mutual beneficial relationship between different states and cultures. And this principle, yes, please.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. 各美其美，美人之美，美美与共，天下大同, which translates to appreciate the unique beauty of one's own and cherish others' beauty with openness. When beauties integrate with each other, great unity shines on the world. I think we couldn't put it any better than this.
No, Fei Xiaotong is my inspiration, like my concept of Confucian role ethics. I get that right out of Fei Xiaotong. Fei Xiaotong's distinction between 20 Geju and chaxiu Geju. That Fei Xiaotong goes to London School of Economics, and then he comes back to China and he writes this book. What's it called? 乡土各具乡土中国乡土中国 And what he has realized, he worked with Malinowski, the father of anthropology at London School of Economics. And what he did was he discovered that the concept of person is so different within the Confucian world that you need a different vocabulary, a different sociology in order to explain it. That you have a choice. You can either reduce a Confucian sociology to European sociology, or you can enrich the field of sociology by creating a vocabulary to explain something that is different, that is importantly different, culturally different. And that's what Fei Xiaotong did. He really looked to cultural difference. What Fei Xiaotong taught us is that in cultural comparisons, what we need a comparative cultural hermeneutic. We have to, in trying to understand the other culture, we have to be aware of what assumptions we're bringing willy-nilly to the investigation itself. That cultural understanding is a process of personal understanding and understanding the other at the same time. Otherwise, we reduce the other culture to our own values. And so it's really important that Fei Xiaotong be part of our discussion this morning. He was one of our intellectual heroes.
Great. We have so many questions coming in. The next question is from Bobby McInno. Sorry about the mispronunciation. What is the role of political efficacy for this model? Should all government decisions be family-based and deferential moral considerations, such as matters of economy, austerity, during crisis, military, etc.? I wonder if this Confucian model accounts for the numerous difficult situations that government bodies find themselves facing in today's world.
I think with the Confucian model, Bobby, what you have is the idea that these are not separate spheres, that that leadership in the world, like when we get away from family, let's take something like military. When we get away from the concept of family, then we talk about casualties of war, and we make them into numbers. Stalin would famously said that if one person is killed, it's a tragedy. If 1 million people are killed, it's a statistic. That if we were to understand the consequences of war in a familial way, we would stay away from war. In the Tao Te Ching, there's a wonderful passage that the Tao Te Ching has the same philosophy of war as the Sun Tzu Bingfa. That for Sun Tzu, warfare is bu de yi. It's the last resort. Is if we can't find any other way out, then it's something that we have to do. If we have a Hitler who is engaged in a genocide, then we have to go to war, and we have to take our children with us. That there is a time for war, but in this in the Tao Te Ching, what this passage says is it says that when the victor walks onto the battlefield and sees the casualties that have accrued, that the victor looks at that battlefield as a funeral, not as a source of glory. That funerals are all about family. That if we can carry the sense of family over into the business of warfare, we would be much less inclined to the brutalities that are characteristic of warfare. If we saw somebody being killed on the battlefield as somebody's grandson or somebody's granddaughter, we would think differently about how warfare is prosecuted. So I think that this idea of getting back to family and bringing those feelings with us in all of the different dimensions of the human experience is salutary.
Thank you very much. We may only have the time for one more question. This question is from Ned Davis. What is the relation between Confucianism as a philosophical resource and China today as a model for the world? Is Xi Jinping a model of virtuous leadership?
I would expect nothing less from Ned. They're sort of putting me in an awkward situation, Ned. Always a good idea. I think that, let me say this about the world in which I'm living. How do I see Chinese politics today? Well, I live in China, and there's an enormous civility within the world in which I live, that people are friendly, that people are accommodating, that people are respectful, are deferential, and so on. That in this world over the last generation, you have seen a process of poverty alleviation that has never been experienced in the world before. And when I first came to China in 1985, I came through Shanghai. We hired a car and we had to stop every 20 kilometers to ask somebody, how do we get to the next town? Because there were no roads. We got to Shandong and there was garlic and there was bing and there was cucumbers and nothing else. And then we finally got to Beijing, and Beijing University was in tatters. You fast forward to today. Before the pandemic, I flew out of Beijing airport, the second busiest airport in the world, to Zhuhai. Zhuhai has just created a new airport. I drove for an hour and a half with buildings, skyscrapers on either side of the road until I got to the ocean. And there I looked out at a bridge that was 58 kilometers long, a bridge that takes an hour to drive from Macau to Hong Kong. That I arrived at Zhuhai, at Zhongshan Zhuhai, a brand new university that is accommodating a whole new population of students. What I would say, Ned, is that what has happened in China in one generation is unprecedented in the human experience. When I go to Gansu, the apartments in Jiangye are as expensive as the apartments in Beijing because they have undertaken the same process of development that Beijing has taken. And so whatever criticisms I would make of leadership in China today, I would at the same time be hugely appreciative of something that has really worked. And if this model of development can be carried to other places in the world and done in a way that is win-win, then it's good for the world. So I'm very comfortable in China, and I'm very comfortable with the politics of China. The kind of language that I hear, a 共同体, this idea of optimizing symbiosis, what is the alternative to that? What is the alternative to the world working together in order to create a better world? There is no alternative to it. And so it's always good to be critical, of governance. But at the same time, what we have to do is we have to recognize achievements when achievements have been made.
Well, on that positive note, we have to bring this very lively discussion to an end, and our time is up. A very big mahalo to Professor Ames for your very enlightening and informative talk, for sharing with us your great insights and expertise. And I learned a lot personally, and I think we can use your ideas to explain a lot of Chinese domestic policies and even foreign diplomacies. For example, the Common Prosperity Policy, 共同富裕, and the One Belt, One Road initiative. All of them try to achieve this, win-win co-prosperity for the mankind, no matter what background you are from. Okay, many thanks as well to our audience for your very interesting comments and questions. I'm awfully sorry for not being able to present your question to Professor Ames. If you would like to talk to Professor Ames, you can stay on and maybe I can promote you to the panelist and you can show your face. And I'm sure Professor Ames would like to see a lot of old friends here. Okay. Before you go, a quick reminder that we have another event coming up on February 2nd. It is a faculty dialogue about Jose Rizal, the Philippine national hero, and the controversy regarding his Chinese background and ancestry. I hope you can join us again. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you next time. Bye-bye.